Hey guys, tonight we step into the most tragic story ever recorded in European history, where a queen who should have reigned over a magnificent court was imprisoned not by foreign invaders, but by her own blood. Imagine being born with royalty in your veins, only to watch your father, your husband, and finally your son strip away your freedom, your voice, and ultimately your honor. This is not a fairy tale tragedy, but a calculated destruction, an insidious psychological drama, more binding than any chain or dungeon wall. Joanna of Castile, Joanna the Mad, was not declared insane by medical diagnosis, but deprived of power by ruthless political machinations. For nearly half a century, she lived like a ghost within the walls of Tordesillas Castle, witnessing day after day the conspiracy that shattered her life. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your local area right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Joanna of Castile, whose full name was Juana I of Castile, was born on the 26th of February in the year 1479 in the city of Avila, Spain. She was the third daughter among 6 children born to Ferdinand, II of Aragon, and Isabella I of Castile, 2 monarchs renowned for unifying Spain and completing the Reconquista by expelling the Moors from Granada. Joanna's maternal family belonged to the Trastamara line, which rose to prominence in the 13th century. Her maternal grandfather was King Henry III of Castile, who left the kingdom in a phase of consolidating power and expanding influence. On her paternal side, the Aragonese dynasty led by King John II also played a significant role in shaping the fortunes of the Iberian Peninsula during the medieval era. From an early age, Joanna was raised between the Alhambra Palace in Granada and the castle of Medina del Campo, both centers of lavish power boasting ornate halls, manicured gardens and armories. She grew up alongside her siblings, her eldest sister Isabella, who would later become Queen of Aragon, her brother Alfonso, who died in childhood, her sister Maria, later Queen of Portugal, and 2 younger siblings, Ferdinand and Catherine. Although born third, Joanna once bore the epithet La Beltraneja amid royal doubts over Isabella's legitimacy. However, after Alfonso's death, she became the second eldest daughter after Isabella. Joanna's family embraced absolute monarchy, viewing their children as political assets to be wed into strategic alliances rather than simply members of the bloodline. Joanna's childhood was marked by strict courtly etiquette and a comprehensive education. She was instructed in Latin, French, painting, music, dancing, and the fundamentals of diplomacy. Royal tutors emphasized Christian morality, loyalty to the crown, and the art of emotional restraint to suit the model of a European noblewoman. She frequently attended private councils, listening to discussions on military strategy and her parents' foreign policies, an opportunity rare for women of that era. Beyond academic studies, Joanna engaged with court officials, reviewed tax reports, and examined maps and strategic charts, sharpening her understanding of power and the responsibilities of a future queen. The late 15th century court environment was harsh. Famine, outbreaks of plague, and political pressure from neighboring powers such as France, England, and the Holy Roman Empire. Alongside her formal education, Joanna's family taught her vigilance, warning that any plot against the throne could arise from within, whether from disgruntled nobles or foreign monarchs seeking advantage. Her observational skills, analytical acumen, and emotional discipline were honed from a young age, preparing her to represent the Spanish crown. Under the royal gaze, Joanna was soon selected to represent the Trastamara dynasty at diplomatic receptions, where she met foreign ambassadors and refined her negotiating skills. She demonstrated persuasive talent, diplomatic agility, and quick-witted etiquette. Despite being raised in luxury, Joanna was keenly aware of her responsibilities. She understood that her marriage would become her greatest political instrument, and that any misstep could place her at a disadvantage. In summary, Joanna of Castile came of age in a prosperous yet challenging monarchy, backed by powerful lineage, a thorough education, and a ruthless political climate. These formative elements laid the groundwork for her to develop into a highly knowledgeable queen, but they also made her vulnerable to later schemes to seize her authority. From these very roots emerged her tragic tale. A capable monarch who ultimately spent half a century imprisoned at Tordesillas. Again, let us rewind time back to the late 15th century, when the Iberian Peninsula was ablaze with the fervor of the Reconquista, the final campaign by Christian forces to reclaim territory long held by the Moors. In the year 1492, the city of Granada fell, marking the culmination of decades of conflict, and in that same year, Christopher Columbus embarked upon a voyage that would bring the New World into Spain's grasp. Imagine a realm intoxicated by victory, convinced of its divine mandate, and utterly uncompromising toward any challenge to its authority. Under Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, the Spanish crown was constructed upon iron principles. Marriage served as the ultimate alliance, children became political instruments, and personal feelings were subordinated to the greater good of the kingdom. In this landscape, loyalty to the crown eclipsed every other bond, for the union of hearts was nothing compared to the union of territories. Within this atmosphere of unrelenting ambition, Joanna's upbringing was meticulously arranged to prepare her for future rule. From childhood, she was schooled in languages, music, and the fine arts. Encouraged to master Latin and French, to play the harp with delicate precision, and to sketch portraits that reflected both piety and prestige. Yet, beyond these accomplishments, she was taught the darker lessons of court. Alliances might shatter without warning, betrayal lurked in every corner, and even those closest to her by blood could become foes if their interests diverged. Such lessons instilled in Joanna a cautious reserve and an ever-watchful eye. Ironically, it was this very vigilance, this habit of silence and measured response, that later courtiers would seize upon as evidence of her supposed madness. A tragic twist of fate for a young princess whose prudence was born of necessity. At the tender age of 17, Joanna's life took a decisive turn when her parents arranged her marriage to Philip of Habsburg, dubbed Philip the Handsome, the son of the Holy Roman Emperor and heir to the wealthy and sprawling territories of the Low Countries. On the surface, this union was a geopolitical masterstroke. By linking Castile with Habsburg holdings, Spain could encircle France and bolster its standing among European powers. Yet for Joanna, the marriage contract signed in 1496 was less a celebration of love and more a sentence in disguise. Philip, while undeniably charming and striking in appearance, harbored a calculating ruthlessness beneath his cultivated smile. He viewed his bride not as a partner, but as a conduit to greater wealth and influence, willing to sacrifice her happiness and that of their future children to further his own ambitions and indulge his whims. The wedding festivities in Leuven were nothing short of spectacular. Joanna adorned in sumptuous Spanish silk, her neck and wrists glistening with lustrous pearls, Philip resplendent in Habsburg finery that surpassed even the grandest noble wardrobes. Tournaments, banquets, and pageantry stretched across several days, each event broadcast to foreign dignitaries as a testament to the combined might of the two dynasties. Yet beneath the gilded veneer, the seeds of coercion were being sown. Philip skillfully provoked jealousy and humiliation, staging affairs with court beauties in full view of his new wife, each dalliance designed to erode her confidence and plant doubt in the minds of those who attended. In the rigid etiquette of Renaissance courts, any display of genuine emotion, tears, anger, or sorrow was deemed unseemly for a queen. Thus, Joanna's very humanity, the feelings she could not suppress, was recast as proof of instability. The royal code permitted such cruelty so long as it served political ends. A compliant consort would solidify alliances, but an emotionally demonstrative sovereign threatened to unravel the carefully woven tapestry of power. And so, while the court of Leuven revelled in brilliance and spectacle, Joanna stood quietly on the fringes, her heart heavy with confusion. The ceremonies that once promised a glorious future now foreshadowed the isolation she would endure. As Philip's charms gave way to calculated manipulation, Joanna learned that affection in the halls of power could be weaponized, and that her role as queen was less about ruling a people and more about preserving the fragile balance of dynastic strategy. The marriage that was meant to unite two great houses became the crucible in which Joanna's fate was sealed. A fate defined by psychological subjugation rather than physical chains. A tragedy of the soul that would echo through the corridors of history for nearly half a century. Again, let us drift back into those early years of Joanna's marriage, when the glow of newlywed promise began to fade into the shadows of manipulation. In those gentle dawns and quiet evenings spent within the Habsburg palaces of the Low Countries, Joanna slowly awakened to a painful truth. Philip did not regard her as a companion, but as a mere instrument in his grand design. What had once felt like the tender stirrings of affection was deftly reframed by Philip's courtiers as proof of her instability. Every tender glance was whispered about in corridors. Each soft word she uttered was catalogued as excessive emotion in secret dossiers. Meanwhile, the very silences and withdrawals she adopted for self-preservation were touted as deliberate, defensive strategies, further evidence of a mind too fragile for power. When Joanna gave birth to her first child, a daughter named Eleanor, in the year 1498, the occasion ought to have been celebrated as the consummation of an ideal union. Instead, it became another instrument of control. Philip, ever the tactician, used the new mother's love for her child as leverage, threatening to restrict her access to the infant should she defy him in any meaningful way. In his hands, the birth of Eleanor was repurposed from a joyous milestone into a tool of psychological subjugation. And as the years passed, one child after another followed. Charles, Isabella, Ferdinand, Mary, and Catherine. Each name, each life, was woven into Philip's network of influence, turning Joanna's own progeny into living pawns in his intricate game of dominance. Slowly, the once welcoming court of the Netherlands hardened its heart against her. Noble families who had praised Joanna's keen mind and gracious demeanor now traded whispered rumors in candlelit salons. They spoke of her fitful temper, of her inability to regulate her emotions, feeding the rumor mill until even Joanna began to doubt her own perceptions. In reality, her outbursts of anger or tears were natural responses to the relentless mind games played by her husband's scars inflicted by deliberate provocation. Yet when such reactions were repeated and amplified by court gossip, the boundary between truth and falsehood blurred, and a version of events took hold that painted Joanna as fundamentally unsound. Philip's cunning lay in his seamless weaving of warmth and indifference. In one moment, he would cradle her hand, praise her for a single thoughtful remark, or speak kindly of her artistic talents. In the next, he would withdraw affection without explanation, deliver a cutting rebuke in the privacy of their chambers, or refuse to acknowledge her presence at state functions. This unpredictable oscillation created a persistent state of uncertainty in Joanna's heart, leaving her constantly off balance and desperate for his approval. Each attempt she made to express frustration, sadness, or longing was dutifully recorded by his loyal aides, who then supplemented her medical file with descriptions of her escalating symptoms. Thus, without visible bruises or chains, Joanna found herself bound by an invisible tyranny of perception, each emotional flicker used as evidence to confirm the very madness she was accused of. By the time Joanna had borne 6 children, the cycle of manipulation had become both relentless and covertly systematic. Philip's operatives trusted courtiers, confidants. Even some members of her own household were instructed to observe her every step. They reported back at appointed intervals, describing with forensic detail episodes of tearful outbursts or sudden silences. In their reports, phrases like rampant emotionalism and uncontrolled affect were woven alongside accounts of her reading state dispatches or attending private councils. This careful blending of her genuine political engagement with purported emotional excess ensured that any praise of her insight was overshadowed by accusations of mental fragility. Yet through it all, Joanna clung to her dignity and conviction that one day the truth would outshine Philip's fabrications. In stolen moments, she confided her anxieties to a few trusted ladies in waiting, noting how every heartfelt plea for understanding seemed to vanish into the labyrinth of palace intrigue. She penned letters to her mother, describing the hushed corridors where gossip thrived, the empty feasts where she sat smiling but alone, and the lullabies sung to her children as though her love were a secret crime. Those letters, too, were intercepted and reinterpreted as further proof of her withdrawal from reality. As the years stretched on, it became clear that Joanna's own awareness of her predicament was used as another twist in the psychological spiral. Whenever she showed signs of self-preservation, refusing to attend an ill-timed banquet, delaying an audience until she felt stronger, those actions were construed as evidence of a delusional belief in her own unassailable right to power. Thus, Joanna walked an impossible tightrope. Conform too much, and her spirit would be broken. Stand firm, and her steadfastness would be portrayed as defiance born of madness. In this slow-burning saga, the cruelty was not in a single violent act, but in the steady erosion of Joanna's identity and agency. Philip's strategy of alternating kindness and coldness, of praising then punishing, ensured that every reaction she had, every tear, sigh, or trembling smile could be appropriated as clinical evidence of her so-called illness. By turning her own emotions against her, he constructed a narrative so compelling that even neutral observers found themselves questioning where Joanna's innocence ended and her madness began. And so, dear listener, as you drift toward rest tonight, imagine the quiet corridors of Philip's palaces, where a queen's laughter once echoed, now replaced by the hush of watchful eyes. Envision how, in those same chambers, every beat of her heart was monitored, every flicker of emotion catalogued as if it were a crime. Such is the tragic artistry of Philip's mind games, a tapestry of subtle horrors that left Joanna bound not by iron chains, but by the very perceptions he orchestrated. Again, let us drift back to the year 1504, when the turning of fate's wheel took its most crushing spin. Queen Isabella, whose steadfast hand had guided Castile through triumph and turmoil, breathed her last and left the world beyond those mighty ramparts. By all rights, Joanna should have ascended the throne of Castile, anointment awaiting her like dawn awaiting the night. Yet in Isabella's final testament lay a quiet caveat. Should Joanna prove unable to govern, her father Ferdinand would serve as regent until her son, Charles, came of age. Intended as a temporary safeguard, this clause was swiftly transmogrified into the instrument of Joanna's undoing. No sooner had Isabella's funeral bells tolled than Ferdinand set in motion the first gears of his design. He spread word throughout the noble courts that Joanna, already staggering under the weight of grief, was not of sound mind, an assertion he clothed in the language of concern. Her tears, her long hours of silent mourning, were labelled as evidence of dangerous instability. Only he, Ferdinand of Aragon, could protect the realm from the chaos he now claimed she might unleash. Meanwhile, Philip, ever quick to seize advantage, proclaimed himself Philip, King of Castile, demanding that Joanna's rights be transferred to him as husband and now as protector of the crown. Each quiet objection Joanna raised to these maneuvers was dutifully recorded in the grand ledger of her incompetence, reinforcing the narrative of her incapacity. As the weeks turned into months, Joanna found herself ensnared in a web of her own family's making. The very grief that might have earned her sympathy became, instead, the proof of her irrationality. Each time she sought solace in prayer, Philip's clerics whispered of her excessive religious fervour. When she refused state banquets, Ferdinand's courtiers spoke of her refusal to carry out royal duties. The line between natural mourning and alleged madness blurred until no distinction remained. Within a mere 2 years, 2 sorrow-soaked years, Joanna's realm slipped from her grasp. Once a sovereign in her own right, she became a name in a legal document, a case study managed by regents. Her fate decided in closed chambers rather than on the battlefield or the council floor. The smear campaign against Joanna did not stop at private accusations. Rumours swirled through the royal press that she refused sustenance, that she slept upon cold floors as penance for her sins, and that she donned dishevelled garb unbefitting her station. These tales spread like wildfire among the courtiers, each retelling adding another flourish of depravity or derangement. And as with any effective fiction, a grain of truth underpinned the fabrications. Joanna did fast in mourning, did wander the corridors at dawn in her plain linen shift, but those actions, born of sorrow, were reinterpreted as symptoms of her alleged psychosis. Even the church, once a bastion of moral guidance, lent its voice to the chorus of condemnation. High-ranking bishops issued proclamations that Joanna's confinement in Tordesillas Castle was an act of Christian charity, an act designed to shield a troubled soul from the burdens of worldly power she was too fragile to bear. In the grand cathedrals of Seville and Toledo, sermons reassured the faithful by restraining Joanna. Her caretakers preserved both her spiritual welfare and the stability of Spain itself. Concurrently, the economic currents of southern Spain flowed strong with the new gold of the Americas. Merchants, bankers, and landowners who had prospered in Isabella's golden age feared that any hint of instability might send markets tumbling or invite foreign interference. They lent their influence to Ferdinand's regency, preferring a stable, if austere, reign over the uncertainty of a queen whose mental fitness was now in question. Thus, through pamphlets, sermons, and financial pressure, Joanna's reputation was whittled away until she existed only as a footnote in her own kingdom, a cautionary tale whispered behind closed doors. In this hushed conspiracy, Joanna's every right was stripped one by one. She was barred from attending council sessions, from issuing decrees in her own name, even from meeting envoys without official supervision. Her signature, once emblematic of royal command, became a mere stamp applied at Ferdinand's pleasure. The crown that ought to have rested upon her brow was placed, instead, upon the heads of those who wielded power in her stead. And all the while, Joanna's own protests were catalogued as resistance born of her unreliable temperament. As the second anniversary of Isabella's death approached, the young ruler Charles, barely a man, found himself elevated to a central role in this grand charade. He was urged by his grandfather and his father to view his mother's detention as both necessary and irreversible. Any attempt he made to intercede was portrayed as further proof of Joanna's disruptive influence. A web of intrigue now complete, with father, husband, and son united in a single purpose: to keep Joanna in a gilded cage of her own making. And so, dear listener, imagine Joanna in those final quiet moments before sleep, her noble heart weary, her spirit stifled by the very hands meant to shield her. The loss of her mother, compounded by the relentless assaults of her closest kin, transformed her from a reigning queen into a silenced relic. In the hush of those stone chambers, the echoes of her once grand reign dissipated into an autumnal hush, a cautionary lullaby of power's dark demands, and the tragic cost borne by those born with crowns in their blood. Again, let us drift into the stillness of mid-15th century Spain, where the turning of seasons carried with it a tragedy that would bind Joanna ever tighter in her gilded cage. In the year 1506, Philip the Handsome was swept away by a sudden illness, officially typhoid fever. The whispers of poison curled through the corridors like a restless mist. One might have thought that with his passing, the tension that knotted Joanna's life would loosen, that perhaps the manipulator's departure would grant her some measure of release. Yet paradoxically, it did the opposite. Philip's death became the very pretext by which Ferdinand consolidated his grip on power. Every teardrop she shed at her husband's bier was catalogued as proof of derangement, how she could not bear to leave his side, how she finally opened the coffin to press a farewell kiss upon the lips of a corpse. These acts of mourning, raw and human, were reframed as evidence of her madness, each detail polished into a grotesque spectacle for consumption by a court eager to see her fall. Ferdinand, ever vigilant, seized the moment to declare that Joanna must remain confined until she recovers, extending his regency indefinitely. The phrase temporary guardianship was stretched thin across diplomatic letters until it snapped under the weight of its own deceit. Even those European courts that had begun to murmur doubts fell silent, unwilling to risk offending a Spain whose power now seemed absolute. Thus, Joanna was conveyed to the castle of Tordesillas, a fortress that once gleamed as a jewel of royal prerogative, now transformed into an elegant prison. Her chamber, though furnished with velvets and tapestries, felt stifling, a velvet coffin of quiet despair. Her meals, prepared with the utmost care, arrived day after day in identical fashion, their flavors muted by monotony. Each hour was prescribed, a ritual of rising, dressing, prayer, and appointment, stripped of spontaneity until the mind itself grew numb. A decade later, in 1516, Joanna's son Charles ascended to the title of Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. He inherited not only his father's crown, but also his mother's confinement. With a flourish of imperial decree, Charles formalized every restriction. No unsupervised movement beyond the castle's courtyard, no private correspondence, no unscheduled visitors. All letters were sifted by royal secretaries. Every guest was instructed in a precise script before being permitted entry. Under the guise of spiritual protection, Joanna became a prisoner within her own palace. Each decree writ in cold ink and sealed with the imperial emblem. Within those ancient stone walls, the nobles, the clergy, and the court officials took on the dual role of hostage wardens and secret agents. They recorded her speech, her posture, her slightest frown or sigh, and dispatched reports to Vienna and Madrid. Even her confessor was chosen for loyalty not to her, but to the crown. He listened to her prayers and offered only sanctioned comfort, ever mindful that compassion might betray him to suspicion. The books she was allowed to read were hand-picked: devotional texts, sanctioned histories, moral treatises. Any hint of political philosophy or chronicles of power struggles was forbidden, deemed too dangerous for a mind already deemed precarious. And so, each day unfolded in a weary loop. Joanna would awaken to candlelight filtering through narrow windows, draw on her robes with delicate exactitude, and present herself at the morning mass. Then came the brief period of reading her eyes, tracing words that always returned to sanctioned wisdom, never venturing into the broader world she once might have influenced. Luncheon followed, a ritual as predictable as the tolling of the chapel bell, and then appointments with ladies-in-waiting who had been instructed to offer gentle companionship, but not to provoke any thought of escape or dissent. In the afternoon she might receive a handful of officials, each conducting their business with austere politeness, all the while noting her tone, her gaze, her measure of composure. In the early evening she was led to the modest gardens, once a place of delight, now a staged performance of regal dignity. She would walk the gravel paths, pausing at fountains that tinkled softly in the twilight, the echo of water like a lullaby for her solitude. Here, under the vaulted sky, she might close her eyes and imagine freedom, the courts of Castile, the laughter of her children, the sunlight on the fields beyond Toledo. But such desires were left unspoken, locked away with the gates that barred her path. As night descended, the routine repeated. A simple supper, a brief visit from her confessor, and then the return to her chamber, where she would sit by the hearth, tracing the patterns of flame as though reading a private scripture. The servants withdrew at a whisper, the door clicked shut, and the hush settled back over Tordesillas, an oppressive hush that pressed upon her mind like a weight. In those final hours before sleep, she lay upon her bed, alone with her thoughts and the soft hum of the castle's night watch. The walls, thick with history, seemed to absorb her sighs, recasting them as yet another symptom to be noted. Thus, dear listener, imagine the gentle cadence of Joanna's days, a succession of measured steps, polite conversations, and silent longings, all observed, recorded, and repurposed as proof of her confinement. Picture her, a queen in name, a prisoner in truth, caught in a carefully orchestrated ballet of duty and deprivation. In the stillness of her chamber, the only rebellion was the beating of her heart, a quiet testament to spirit unbroken, even as the world conspired to convince her that she was lost to her own sorrow. As you drift towards sleep, feel the soft weight of her story, a soothing lament that lingers like a distant melody, shaped by the unyielding architecture of power and the fragile grace of a soul denied its rightful voice. Even as the court's propaganda machine churned relentlessly against her, priceless glimpses of Joanna's true character managed to surface. A handful of diplomats granted controlled audiences with her quietly recorded conversations, brimming with nuance and astuteness on European politics. They noted her deep knowledge of power structures, her insight into potential alliances, and her awareness of looming threats so contrary to the dreamy madwoman image her father and husband had manufactured. These envoys, reclining on silk divans in guarded chambers, emerged astonished, scribbling in secret dispatches that Joanna spoke with clarity, befitting a sovereign, not the incoherent rantings of the insane. Secret letters, smuggled past vigilant censors, further revealed Joanna's grasp of statecraft. In carefully folded missives tied with crimson ribbon, she discussed the balance of noble factions, the risks of foreign marriage, and the impact of New World trade on royal coffers. Each folded sheet, risking her wrath if intercepted, demonstrated her command of detail and her strategic resolve. These clandestine communications glimmered like hidden stars against the dark backdrop of her official confinement. Even the royal physicians, under pressure to diagnose her as hopelessly unwell, confessed in private correspondence that they found no evidence of severe mental derangement. Their personal letters spoke instead of profound grief and melancholic withdrawal symptoms more akin to depression born of successive tragedies than acute psychosis. Remarkably, Joanna lived into her 70s, outlasting many of her contemporaries despite the harsh restrictions of her custody, a longevity inconsistent with genuine insanity in an age when mental illness carried its own heavy toll upon health and survival. Amidst this shadowed battle of perception, the Comuneros uprising of 1520 to 1521 shone as a vivid testament to Joanna's enduring political acumen. When rebel forces briefly captured Tordesillas and extolled her as their figurehead, she did not erupt in emotional fervor nor slip into erratic action. Instead, she calmly evaluated the situation, weighing risks with the cool precision of a seasoned strategist. She chose not to endorse the revolt, aware that rash involvement could plunge Castile into further carnage. This measured judgment, too prudent for the rebels, too defiant for her captors, was hailed by diplomatic observers as proof of her clear-mindedness and sense of responsibility. Chroniclers outside the royal orbit, those free from the court strictures, preserved scattered records of Joanna's quiet courage. Their annals describe her with eyes cast in gentle sorrow yet resolute as steel. A queen who knew that reclaiming her throne would require intellect over arms. In one fragmentary chronicle, she is remembered pacing the battlements at dusk, tracing the distant hills with a furrowed brow, contemplating strategies rather than succumbing to despair. These hardy snippets of memory served as intellectual lifelines for later generations questioning the official narrative. Together, these foreign reports and independent chronicles formed a mental rescue buoy for Joanna's legacy, challenging the carefully constructed case against her. They offered solace to those who believed that truth might yet outlast the propaganda, that her wisdom could cast light on the darkest deformations. Each diplomat's journal entry, each physician's confession, each rebel's slighted hope, and each lone chronicler's passage combined into a tapestry of resistance against the relentless tide of slander. And so, dear listener, as you drift towards sleep, imagine Joanna's mind aflame with ideas and plans, even as her body remained confined. Picture her poring over reports in flickering lamplight, composing her cautious letters, and weighing the fates of nations with that same precision she once wielded as princess and queen. In that hushed reflection, her spirit endures an eternal whisper of clarity amid the fog of lies, a testament to the power of the mind when shackles cannot touch it. As you breathe softly, let her resolve become your lullaby, a gentle reminder that truth, though buried, can never be wholly silenced. Again, let us ease back into the silent aftermath of the Comuneros' defeat, when the walls of Tordesillas drew ever tighter around Queen Joanna's fragile world. After that ill-fated uprising, Emperor Charles V issued a cascade of edicts that codified every invisible shackle. She was permitted to step only within the castle's inner courtyard, barred from opening a single letter unsupervised, and each guest's presence required the watchful eyes of appointed escorts. The grand fortress, once a symbol of regal authority, transformed into a haughty prison. Its thick stone ramparts rising cold and impassive, narrow arrow-slit windows offering scant light, and a cadre of stewards doubling as spies, trailing her footsteps in hushed procession. Each morning began with the rigid pageantry of court ritual. Joanna awoke to the rustle of silk attendants' gowns, and was dressed in gown and kirtle befitting her station, pins and jewels arranged with ceremonious precision. She would then join in the chapel's solemn liturgy, her voice raised in hymn according to the church calendar, her posture poised for all to see. Only after the final Amen was she granted privilege of the library. There, rows of tomes beckoned like so many forbidden gardens. Yet these were carefully curated volumes, devotional texts, approved histories of the Habsburg lineage, and doctrinal treatises, reinforcing the propriety of her confinement. Any work of political critique or philosophical reflection on power was purged, as though her mind must be shielded from the very ideas she was said to lack. In the hush of that austere library, Joanna's whispered attempts to pen letters or sketch marginal notes took on the air of subversion. On more than one occasion, federal guards burst into her private study, overturning inkwells and riffling through parchment, searching for signs of impropriety. Each unexpected raid left her heart racing and her fingers trembling, an intrusion as disconcerting as any physical blow. Yet, to the outside world, it remained a veneer of benevolent oversight, a paternalistic measure to preserve her well-being. Loneliness, however, lay closer to home than any guard. Her only surviving son, now Emperor Charles, maintained the strictures of her captivity under the guise of spiritual guardianship. Visits from him, once anticipated as glimpses of familial warmth, became exercises in restraint. At formal audiences, she would rise to greet him with a curtsy measured by court protocol, her gaze lowered in deference. Any gesture of maternal affection, an embrace, a hand pressed to the heart, was met with a gentle rebuke from chamberlains advising against displays of excessive emotion. Thus, the infrequent moments with her offspring served not as solace, but as reminders of the cold calculus that had supplanted genuine kinship. Within those massive walls, Joanna avoided physical violence, yet her spirit was eroded daily by the precise choreography of mental confinement. She was still addressed as Your Majesty, still draped in silks that whispered of grandeur, but every protocol was calibrated to undermine her autonomy. Isolation confined her body. Surveillance permeated her mind. Censorship sealed her innermost thoughts. At midday, she partook of a simple repast in a small solar, a single plate of stew and bread, eaten alone in a chamber where conversation was forbidden. No servant dared linger beyond the appointed moments. No friend dared address more than the approved pleasantries. Come afternoon, when the sun dipped low across the Duero River, Joanna would be escorted to a narrow terrace for a prescribed hour of reflection. She sat on a carved bench, her gaze tracing the river's slow, steady current as it slipped past the castle drawbridge. In that hush, she saw not the water's shimmer, but the rhythm of her own solitary vigil. The distance between her world and the rolling hills beyond seemed insurmountable. In the distance, she might imagine the city of Valladolid bustling with merchants and courtiers. Yet here she remained a silent witness, her voice merely an echo in the stones. As dusk settled, the guards guided her back through the torchlit corridor. Flickering flames cast dancing shadows upon tapestries depicting ancestors who had once wielded power unchallenged. Joanna passed these silent sentinels, each stitch a reminder of the lineage she carried yet could no longer command. In her chamber, she changed into her velvet nightrobe, the weight of fabric heavier than any chain. She knelt at a small prie-dieu before a simple crucifix, murmuring prayers for deliverance, prayers that floated unanswered through the vaulted ceiling. At last, she lay upon her canopied bed, the canopy's drapes drawn tight to ward off drafts, creating a cocoon of semi-darkness. The day's routines faded into memory, leaving her alone with the steady chorus of her own heartbeats and the distant drip of water from the cistern. Outside, the castle's sentries paced their posts, eyes never straying far from the chamber in which the queen sorceress of rumour lay dreaming. In that quiet, Joanna's mind might wander to the hills she could not traverse, to the throne she was told she could not hold, to the freedom she was forbidden to taste. And as you, dear listener, drift towards slumber, let her steady breathing be your lullaby, a soft, sorrowful cadence, reminding you how even the grandest life can be whittled to a solitary pattern of days, each one echoing the last in the hush of confinement. Joanna closed her life at the age of 76. Yet her story did not end with her final breath. In the 16th century, the legend of the Mad Queen spread like ink across countless manuscripts and early printed books. Court writers and chroniclers, eager for sensational tales, wove elaborate fictions around her name, depicting her as the archetype of female hysteria and instability. Their accounts, freely copied by scribes and later typeset by the new printing presses, cemented an enduring stereotype that any woman who dared wield power risked being labelled mad. Thus, Joanna's true legacy was buried under layers of rumour and reductive caricature. Centuries later, in the 19th and subsequent centuries, a cadre of revisionist historians began to unearth the buried documents of Joanna's life. They sifted through diplomatic correspondence preserved in royal archives, unsealed private journals, and smuggled copies of medical reports once hidden from public view. These scholars noted the vast gulf between the official tales of a deranged queen and the sober reality recorded in dispatches by foreign ambassadors. Their analyses revealed Joanna's clear political reasoning and coherent thoughts throughout her long confinement, shattering the myth of her supposed insanity. This academic awakening exposed the systematic efforts by Ferdinand, Philip, and later Charles to sustain a narrative that justified their unified grip on power, always at Joanna's expense. The rehabilitation of Joanna's reputation gathered momentum through a series of meticulous studies, international conferences, and the translation of primary texts from medieval Latin and archaic Spanish into modern languages. Psychologists specializing in historical diagnoses revisited her documented symptoms and concluded that what she truly endured was more akin to profound grief, chronic depression, and stress akin to what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder. Far from suffering acute psychosis or schizophrenia, Joanna's emotional responses mirrored the understandable anguish of a woman stripped of her agency and forced into isolation. These insights invited both scholars and the public to reconsider not only Joanna's plight, but the broader human cost of political repression. This scholarly re-evaluation transcended mere academic exercise. It resonated deeply with modern movements for human dignity and justice. Joanna's ordeal has become emblematic of how ostensibly temporary measures like a regency intended to protect a vulnerable heir can calcify into lifelong constraints when wielded by those in power. Her case reminds us that legal decrees, medical pronouncements, and religious endorsements can all be co-opted to legitimize the permanent subjugation of individuals. In her story, advocates for human rights find a historical precedent for warning against the unchecked authority of any institution. However benevolent its rhetoric may appear, in our 21st century, characterized by ever-advancing surveillance technologies and the relentless onslaught of information warfare, Joanna's experience takes on renewed relevance. The real enemies of truth are often not foreign adversaries, but the very power structures that claim to safeguard society. When regimes manipulate legal systems, medical expertise, or spiritual authority, they can erase inconvenient truths and crush dissenting voices. The castle walls of Tordesillas may have been physical, but today's walls are digital firewalls, algorithms, and echo chambers that isolate individuals and filter facts to serve entrenched interests. As you drift toward sleep, picture Joanna rebuilding her inner life amid that enforced solitude. Imagine her poring over smuggled letters, forging mental alliances with distant envoys, and plotting subtle strategies to preserve her sense of self. These acts of intellectual resistance became her quiet rebellion, a proof of mind unconquered by chains. In the same way, our capacity to seek and share objective facts, to challenge propaganda, and to uphold compassion in the face of coercion forms the bedrock of collective freedom. So let her story be your gentle reminder that even the softest voice can echo through the stone corridors of history, and that the flicker of individual conscience may outlast the darkest campaigns of deception. In honoring Joanna's reclaimed legacy, we honor every soul whose truth was once silenced by authority's cold decree. May this lullaby of history guide you into a restful night, buoyed by the knowledge that truth, however suppressed, remains companion to the human spirit. Again, let us drift gently into the final chapter of Joanna's life, as shadows lengthen in the autumn of her years. In the year 1555, Joanna drew her last breath within the walls of Tordesillas. Officially, she remained Queen of Castile upon the register of her passing, yet no grand funerary pageant honored her name. Her coffin lay in quiet state, attended by only a handful of senior officials and the vice-regent representing the imperial court. Notices of her death slipped through court dispatches and diplomatic communiques in barely more than a footnote, lacking the solemn drums and chorus that had marked the departures of Isabella and Ferdinand. After Joanna's silent farewell, life at Tordesillas resumed its measured rhythms under Charles V's administration. Her personal archives were swiftly reclaimed. Letters and journals vanished into imperial vaults or were redirected to the Royal Library in Madrid. Personal effects that once adorned her chamber, finely embroidered gowns, painted devotional diptychs, were either sold or transferred to the capital's treasuries. The guest ledgers, once listing her name beside those of visiting envoys, were overwritten or locked away, as though her presence had been a mere tremor upon the stone corridors. Thus, the spectre of the Ghost Queen dissolved from the official cartography of history, surviving only in the hushed folklore whispered along the banks of the Duero. With Joanna's passing, the last embers of any movement to restore her power were extinguished. Though Charles V's manner toward his mother had been coldly formal, he maintained a deft diplomatic balance to prevent her legend from unsettling the fragile status quo. Subsequent reigns followed his lead in preserving the silence around her case, treating Joanna's fate as a cautionary tale of how a troublesome queen could be quietly removed through a blend of paternal concern and legal artifice. In palace halls and council chambers, they spoke little of Joanna the Mad, except to caution that any future Queen of Castile must embody unquestioned loyalty and flawless comportment. Yet, across the centuries, small sparks of remembrance endured, flickering in the works of artists and writers who felt her absence most keenly. In the late 18th and 19th centuries, scholars began to pore over marginal entries in dusty archives, sparking the first glimmers of renewed interest. In the 20th and 21st centuries, filmmakers crafting solemn documentaries reimagined her story with sympathetic nuance. Novelists penned historical fictions that portrayed her as a woman of steadfast intellect betrayed by those she trusted most, and illustrators painted her in soft candlelight, eyes reflecting both sorrow and resolve. These creative efforts, though few, coaxed her name back into the awareness of niche circles, academic colloquia, enthusiast blogs, museum exhibits dedicated to forgotten sovereigns. Still, Joanna's commemoration remained largely contained within the halls of research institutes and the pages of specialized journals. Yet each brushstroke and each reel of film whispered a shared conviction that the true Joanna was neither mad nor monstrous, but a dignified queen ensnared by the very measures meant to shield her. These artistic tributes offered gentle awakenings to wider audiences, hinting that beneath the veneer of silence lay a nuanced story of endurance and wisdom. In the end, Joanna's death at Tordesillas was not a period marking the conclusion of her tale, but rather a triumph of memory's resilient pulse. The very forces that sought to scrawl her from history unwittingly exposed the cruelty of their own regime, prompting later generations to seek out and restore the suppressed truths. Her quiet passing, observed by so few, became a catalyst for future reclamations of justice through scholarship, art, and collective reflection. So, dear listener, as your eyelids grow heavy, imagine Joanna's legacy rising like dawn's pale light over the Duero River, soft, persistent, and unbound by the crumbling stones that once held her captive. In that gentle glow, her story lives on, a serene testament to the enduring power of truth to outlast even the darkest designs. Let this lullaby of history carry you into rest, comforted by the knowledge that, though buried, genuine voices of justice will always find a path back into the world's awakening. Again, let us ease into the broader echoes of Joanna's tale, beyond the granite walls of Tordesillas and into the conscience of an entire world. The story of Joanna the Mad transcended its 16th century Spanish origins to become a global cautionary legend, illustrating how political systems can abuse power and weaponize gender bias to neutralize inconvenient rivals. For nearly 5 centuries, her case has served as a classic study in how fabricated laws, politicized medicine, and subtle propaganda can conspire to silence a sovereign. Many later women of power, Queen Elizabeth I, Empress Catherine the Great, faced similar pressures, albeit seldom with the same unrelenting severity. In our age of information, where personal surveillance can be near constant and soft imprisonment is often disguised as protection or re-education, Joanna's plight feels eerily current. She reminds us that freedoms of speech, of fair process, of equality are not guaranteed by default. They can be eroded through labels of mental instability. Repeated so often, they become accepted as fact. Across the modern world, authoritarian regimes still deploy such tactics, declaring critics mentally ill, subjecting them to treatment, and using the veneer of legality to justify repression. Scholars and human rights advocates consistently cite Joanna as a prime example of gendered authoritarianism, where talented women, even those with clear, legitimate claims, can be stripped of power through ruthless, legally sanctioned maneuvers. Research into her life has become foundational material for campaigns promoting women's rights, transparent governance, and a free press. Joanna's story has underscored the need for legal safeguards against politically motivated psychiatric diagnoses and for independent media capable of challenging official narratives. Around the world, civil society organizations, museums, and universities have hosted conferences and exhibitions dedicated to Joanna's legacy. They screen documentaries reenacting her life, display facsimiles of her secret letters, and exhibit artwork depicting her resilience. These events serve not only to celebrate her courage under siege, but also to spark public dialogues on power dynamics, ethical leadership, and collective responsibility. Visitors linger before the glass cases holding her personal effects, read interpretive panels about the political intrigue she endured, and join panel discussions that connect her experience to contemporary struggles for justice. As young people encounter Joanna's story, they equip themselves with the critical lens needed to identify and resist modern forms of soft incarceration, whether digital, legal, or social. Her legacy reminds each generation that systems lacking transparency and accountability can wield justice as an instrument of oppression. Only by persistently asking questions and vigilantly monitoring power can we ensure that truth is not permanently buried. So, dear listener, let Joanna's quiet testament echo in your mind as you drift off. A softly spoken warning that even the most elaborate machinery of authority can be challenged by the steadfast will of one individual. In her memory, may you find the resolve to stand watch over your own freedoms and to keep the lamp of truth alight, no matter how dim the night may grow. Again, let us soften our voices as we tiptoe into the long years that followed. After Emperor Charles V formally ratified his mother's confinement in 1516, Joanna settled permanently into the castle of Tordesillas, where she would remain for another 39 years. In that time, every trace of her former autonomy was stripped away. Her private chamber, though arranged with finery tapestries of crimson and gold, a canopy bed draped in velvet served only as a place for sleep. The small library at its side held a handful of carefully selected volumes, official histories lauding the Habsburg line, and sacred scriptures for her daily devotions. Not a single play, love poem, or treatise on governance dared cross the threshold. Outside, the garden's neatly clipped hedges and fountains gleamed under the sun, yet Joanna's view was always from behind the iron grid of a window's narrow bars. Every hallway and doorway lay under the watch of sentinels whose silent gaze missed nothing. Each murmured word, each flicker of expression, every subtle gesture could be recorded as evidence of her mental instability. Each morning began with the choreography of court ritual. Joanna rose at dawn to the soft rustle of attendants' skirts and the measured click of floor tiles. She dressed in gowns whose colours marked the liturgical season: violet for Advent, white for Easter pins and brooches positioned just so. She then took her place in the chapel for the daily mass, her voice joining the choir's harmonies, her posture an embodiment of regal devotion. Afterwards, she dined on simple fare in the communal refectory, a bowl of broth, a hunk of bread, shared only with her steward and 2 or 3 vetted guests whose very presence had been pre-approved. Conversation was kept to formalities. Any hint of personal reflection or political inquiry was discouraged. In the afternoon, Joanna might retreat to her permitted pastimes. She would open the authorized tomes, church histories, approved chronicles, and allow her mind to wander through their pages, though always under watchful eyes. Occasionally, she would take up her embroidery frame, delicate threads passing through the fabric under her slender fingers. Yet even these benign pursuits carried the weight of censorship. Her needles paused only when a guard approached, her embroidery patterns predefined to adorn the castle, not to express her own thoughts. Any marginal scribble, any unauthorized note, risked confiscation. Letters she attempted in secret were intercepted. Any utterance of the words freedom or power was meticulously crossed out in thick black ink before the pages were returned. Yet in the hollow moments between these enforced routines, Joanna found small ways to assert her dignity. She maintained a calm grace when addressing her limited circle of visitors, speaking gently yet clearly. She inquired discreetly about the health of the kingdom, gleaning news from the few envoys permitted entry. In her hidden journal, its pages discovered only centuries later, she composed entries with the care of a scribe. Acute observations of regional affairs, cautious reflections on court politics, and the ever-present hope that one day truth will prevail. These private writings, smuggled past watchful guards, served as her discreet manifesto, a testament that her intellect remained unsilenced, despite her silence. Nevertheless, these acts of quiet resistance proved insufficient to shatter the palace's invisible shackles. As her end approached, Joanna understood more keenly than ever that her captivity extended beyond the castle walls into the very recesses of her mind. Freedom, she came to see, was not merely a matter of geography but of the spirit. In a fragment of her diary, later pieced together by scholars, she wrote of her anguish. "They have gone mad in depriving me of a life of purpose, yet my soul, though nailed and bound, shall never bow to their will." This silent fortitude amid relentless propaganda and isolation stands as lasting proof of her capability and royal dignity. Even as the world labelled her mad, Joanna's unwavering resolve, her commitment to truth, her careful preservation of knowledge, her refusal to surrender her inner life, revealed the heart of a true queen. In imagining those final weary nights, let us hear her gentle breathing echo in the stone corridors, a lullaby of steadfast spirit, reminding us that even in the deepest darkness, the mind can remain luminous. And so, dear listener, as you drift towards rest, carry with you Joanna's soft but unbreakable voice, a whisper that freedom, though suppressed, cannot be entirely extinguished. Again, let us drift back to the quiet corners of history, where scattered documents serve as the litmus test for truth. Though every move Joanna made was watched by the court's ever-vigilant eyes, a handful of rare records survived to whisper a truer story. Diplomatic letters exchanged with envoys from France, England, and the Italian principalities describe her as calm and politically astute. These dispatches lay hidden in dusty archives until 19th and 20th century historians exhumed and published them. In one such French missive, an ambassador marveled at Joanna's grasp of Franco-Spanish treaties. In an English report, a diplomat noted how she questioned trade privileges with measured insight. Italian envoys, too, recorded her thoughtful inquiries into papal relations and Mantuan alliances. Together, these accounts pierced the courtly veil of slander, revealing a sovereign far from the caricature of a mind untethered. Contemporary chroniclers unbound by the palace's strictures also left us glimpses of Joanna's active engagement. One Italian annalist recounted her insistence on coordinating relief efforts for Toledo during the Comuneros uprising, pressing local officials to allocate grain and negotiate safe passages. Far from being passive or powerless, she displayed a keen sense of civic responsibility, guiding the city's response to internal strife with tempered judgment. Her role in Toledo's defense, preserved in these outsider chronicles, stands as testament to her enduring leadership instincts even amid confinement. Equally illuminating are the letters penned by royal physicians. Though these doctors faced immense pressure to endorse the narrative of her madness, their private correspondence reveals a deeper truth. In notes addressed to colleagues in Seville and Madrid, they speculated that Joanna's symptoms aligned more with profound depression, unrelenting sorrow born from the loss of her husband, her parents, and her throne rather than any delusional psychosis. One physician recorded her physical ailments: chronic fatigue, arthritic pain in her joints, a pallor indicative of malnutrition. Yet he noted, in the same breath, that her mind remained clear, her reasoning intact. Such medical marginalia, hidden from formal court records, provide a window into her true condition. A woman laden with grief, not a mind unmoored by insanity. Modern historical societies have convened symposia to analyze these primary sources, juxtaposing Joanna's experience with that of other female rulers who faced similar perils. Scholars agree that she exemplifies the classic victim of factional despotism, where the label of insanity is wielded as a political weapon to eliminate any challenge from within the ranks of power. By meticulously reconstructing the original documents, diplomatic letters, physicians' notes, outsider annals researchers not only restore her reputation, but also highlight the brutal efficacy of state-controlled media and orchestrated propaganda. Through this rigorous scholarship, Joanna's life ceases to be a footnote in sensationalist tales and emerges as a cautionary beacon about the dangers of unchecked political messaging. In these hushed academic gatherings, often held through candlelit presentations or soft-screen projections, attendees pore over facsimiles of 12th and 16th century parchments. They debate the subtle shifts in terminology, how melancholia, in a physician's hand, morphed into lunacy in official reports, how advised withdrawal became voluntary isolation. Each paper read, each annotated translation shared, chips away at the edifice of half-truths. And as you, dear listener, surrender to the calm embrace of slumber, imagine these scholars gently turning pages in dimly lit libraries, their lamps flickering like lanterns guiding shipwrecked truth back to shore. Thus we see how, even under layers of censorship and coercion, fragments of reality endured. Through diplomatic cables smuggled past censors, medical notes penned in confidentiality, and foreign chronicles unbound by palace intrigue, historians piece together Joanna's genuine legacy. Her story is not of a sovereign undone by her own mind, but of a powerful woman, ensnared by the very mechanisms designed to protect her. In celebrating these rediscoveries, we honor the resilience of her intellect and the unwavering pulse of truth itself, ever persistent, even when submerged beneath the cold stones of Tordesillas. May these silent testaments accompany you into gentle depths of sleep, reassuring you that, however faint, the voice of authenticity can never be fully extinguished. Again, let us sink into the gentle ripple of Joanna's ever-widening legacy as her story drifts beyond the bounds of 16th century Spain to become a global symbol of the perils women face when they dare to claim power. Scholars have traced a common thread through the reigns of later female sovereigns, from Elizabeth I of England to Catherine the Great of Russia, and onward to Queen Victoria of Britain. Each of these women, celebrated for their strength and vision, nonetheless encountered an insidious chorus of voices ready to attribute any sign of assertiveness to mental instability or female hysteria. In this light, Joanna's ordeal emerges as the earliest recorded instance of a triumvirate alliance: medicine, law, and religion conspiring to strip a woman of authority, sending a chilling warning to all who would follow in her footsteps. As we drift forward in time to the 20th and 21st centuries, Joanna's tale took on fresh resonance with the rise of feminist movements across the globe. Activists cited her example to demonstrate that the struggle for suffrage and legal equality, while vital, represented only one front in a broader battle. They argued that without vigilant oversight of judicial systems, medical institutions, and media narratives, the same tactic of pathologizing female leaders could recur under different guises. In earnest essays and stirring speeches, they invoked Joanna's memory to remind society that the label of hysteria had once been wielded like a dagger to remove a rightful queen, and that modern societies must guard against similarly arbitrary diagnoses directed at outspoken women today. This theme found expression in a wealth of cultural works. Historical monographs dissected the mechanics of Joanna's deposition. Documentary films wove her story alongside those of other powerful women undone by smear campaigns. Theatrical performances reimagined her final years in Tordesillas as a haunting allegory of silenced voices. In one evocative stage production, the ghost of Joanna drifted through barred windows, echoing her whispered protest, "I was never mad, only a woman of thought." Another documentary juxtaposed archival footage of mid-century psychiatric evaluations with readings from her own secret journals, underscoring how medical authority could be bent to serve political ends. These creative endeavors did more than retell history. They sparked empathy for women whose ambitions threatened established hierarchies. Audiences, lulled by the soft glow of stage lights or the hushed narration of film, found themselves envisioning Joanna not as a relic of the past, but as a living emblem of ongoing struggles. They felt the chill of her confinement, the hollow echo of her lost crown, and the steadfast flame of her intellect flickering against the cold stone of prejudice. Moreover, Joanna's resonance extended into academic conferences and women's studies seminars, where panels explored the parallels between her forced seclusion and contemporary cases of female leaders, censured through sensationalist headlines or dubious medical claims. Attendees, students, professors, activists gathered beneath subdued lights to discuss how the weaponization of psychiatric labels persisted in various forms, from forced commitments in authoritarian regimes to smear campaigns in open democracies. They devised strategies to counter such abuses: mandatory mental health oversight boards, independent of political influence, press watchdog organizations empowered to call out defamatory reporting, and legal safeguards preventing involuntary psychiatric diagnoses without transparent due process. In quiet moments between these gatherings, participants would recall Joanna's own words, preserved in fragments. "My mind remains free, though they cage my body." These echoes provided both solace and resolve, reinforcing the idea that freedom of thought could never be fully extinguished, even by the most elaborate networks of power. And so, dear listener, as your eyelids grow heavy, imagine Joanna's soft voice reverberating across centuries, carrying a simple yet profound warning that the greatest threat to women in power often arises not from hidden adversaries, but from the very systems entrusted to uphold justice and truth. In honoring her story through books, films, and plays, we do more than celebrate her endurance. We arm ourselves against the subtle, enduring spectre of gendered oppression. Let this knowledge settle in your heart like a lullaby, slow, insistent, and enduring. And as you drift into dreams, carry with you the quiet assurance that by remembering Joanna's fate, we keep alive a reminder that liberty, once taken, must be vigilantly reclaimed, and that every tired voice raised against injustice contributes to the awakening of a more just world. As tonight's journey with the tragic story of Joanna the Mad draws to a close, viewers will take away at least 3 precious insights. First, they will gain a profound understanding of how power can exploit law, medicine, and religion to eliminate any voice deemed dangerous. Observing Joanna's soft suffering under invisible restraints reminds us that, even without iron chains, a person's freedom and dignity can be stripped away. Second, this video delivers a message about inner strength and individual responsibility.